Welcome to Historic Miamisburg's Bicentennial Edition, created by the Miamisburg Historical Society as a prelude to our city's 200th anniversary celebration. I am Carol O'Connell, a member of the media production group of the Historical Society. This program is the second of a three-part series, the Miamisburg Town Center Historic District and the 9 sites on the National Register of Historic Places. Each of the 3 programs in our series features 3 of these unique buildings and sites. We hope you viewed the first program, which featured the Marcus Square Building, the Groby Bank, and the Gwenner Block. The second set we feature today includes the Baum Opera House, the Liesenhof Block, and the A.R. Stocker Building. Joining me is my guest, Bobby Sweeney, past president of the Historical Society and an avid historian. And are you ready to take us on our tour?
Of course, let's do it again. You know, Carol, we were talking, as you were mentioning, the Baum Opera House and the Liesenhof Block and the Stocker Building. And people are probably wondering, well, aren't they all 3 buildings, and why are you calling them different names? And they do have a significance because in the old days, all opera houses were called opera houses. This was picked up from the European. And even the hotels were called house, the Miami House, the Baum House. And then occasionally they would switch it and call them hotels. And of course, the Liesenhof Block, we have 3 block buildings in our series, and that simply means that it was a multiple-use building when it was built. They allowed for more than one business building at the street level, and then they built a second story that would have offices, apartments, whatever. We had lawyers, dentists, you name it, insurance agents that had their offices on the 2nd floor. And then if there was a 3rd floor, that was usually an entertainment facility, something that the various orders, business orders, whatever, that were going on in town, the organizations of the Men, Lions Club, Rotary, whatever, could have their meetings in those rooms. So it's just a little interest of why we use different terms for these.
Oh, it can be confusing, so I'm glad you straightened that out for us. The blocks, I think, now would be significant if we would put it in today's terms. That's what our shopping centers are.
Oh, my, yes.
Yes. Well, we have an interesting building to start with today. We call the Baum Opera House, which is located at 15 South 1st Street. Though it has had many names, but it was built in 1884 by Charles Baum, and it was originally called the Star City Opera House. Its seating capacity of 800, which was the first in the city of our size here in Ohio, right here in Miamisburg. Mm-hmm. And our population about that time was only about 2,500 people. So to have a big opera house like that was
800
something.
would take a lot of the city out of it.
Yes. But it is, the architecture of it is the Second Empire style, which features the mansard roofs and molded cornices, and then it has the slate roof, and I have a piece of the old slate roof here. So they still have some of that, and in their rehab they have put slate back in.
Yes.
So what about the man who produced this?
Well, we have to talk about the man, because Charlie Baum was an interesting person in his own right. He came here from Germany at the age of 18, and he got married at the age of 21. At the age of 22, he was hired to run the Miami House, Miami Hotel, for Mrs. Black. Well, she was Dr. Treon's second wife by that time, so she was Mrs. Treon. And at the age of 23, he went to a sheriff's sale, and for $1,620, he bought all the land to build his hotel, which was his dream, and the Baum Opera House, which was his other dream. Then at the age of 26, he opened the Baum House, which was his hotel, not the Baum Opera House. That was called the Star City Opera House. So the Baum House was his hotel. And then at the age of 32, 6 years later, he built the Baum, or the Star City Opera House, which faces on First Street, and died at the age of 43. 43, 25 years he lived in Miamisburg, and look at the legacy he left us.
Oh.
2 wonderful buildings that are still there, still intact, still beautiful, and still useful.
It is quite a legacy that he left, but when he died then, who took over the management?
Well, his wife, Elizabeth, did, and he left a grieving widow and 7 of his 11 children to mourn his passing. And his oldest son, William, worked with his mother for several years, about 5 years, to continue and may have been working in his dad's late years. It's possible his father was not well, and because he worked with her for 5 years to run the hotel. And then he decided he really wanted to do something else. So he did, and his younger brother Peter then took over and worked with his mother.
So they kept it in the family for quite a few years
yes,
then,
they
didn't
did.
they?
And it was an unusual building that they had gas lights in all the rooms. They had gas heat in all the rooms. And eventually he expanded it enough that wasn't adequate to take care of the needs. So he put in a boiler and an engine and a dynamo, built a new one into the building. And then they had electric lights, and they had gas heat in all of the rooms. And I guess their sample room for when the salesman came in was just something to behold. So yes, he had another thing that I like to mention. People would make their reservations when they were coming into Miamisburg. And although he was only 3 blocks from the train station, he took what they called a chariot and met the people coming in and took care of their needs, and then he took them back to the train when they left.
Well, it was a horse and buggy then,
Oh,
wasn't
yes.
it? Yes. Well, it's so romantic, isn't it?
Yes.
Oh, well, there were several names that were given to that building over the years. There was, well, of course, started out as the Star City Opera House. And then it became, and then they called it the Columbia Opera House, and a gymnasium hall. And the Junior Order of United American Mechanics had it, and they had a big sign at the top of it. And it was a zoo, and I think that was in later years. And some of our residents and people probably still remember when they brought in live animals there, and they actually went to the zoo and brought their children there. And then, of course, the Towpath Dinner Theater, and that was, well, that kind of was a prelude now to the La Comedia Theater that's in
that was the type it
Springboro
was,
in
yes.
1975, yes. So this one didn't last very long, though.
Well, the great use that everybody in our area will remember about, you talked about the Junior Hall. The Junior OUAM bought the hall in 1922. Well, in the 30s, when swing bands came in, that was the place to dance. They had dances there for the young people. And the kids from Centerville and Franklin and Germantown, all of them came to Miamisburg for the dancing. And then the older people, the mothers and fathers, they still like the square dancing. They danced down on the first level of the building. But of course, the wartime took toll of that, and the young men were leaving, and so the dancing had to cease for a while.
Yeah, well, that was too bad. But you mentioned the Junior Order of the United American Mechanics.
Yes.
Well, that was an interesting organization. It started out of Philadelphia by a group of men, and it was a union because this was back in like 1845.
Yes.
And they were so, they had the pressure of keeping their jobs, and this group of men started the union to do that. But then out of that grew the Junior Order, which really didn't mean that it was the junior kids at that age, but it was eventually they consumed the larger group as well. So it was, they also have, they came in 1922, they bought the Baum And then they at that time they called it the Columbia.
Yes.
And so that was, they're going to be their home. They had 809 members, didn't they?
Yes, it was
It was
one
a
of the
huge
largest.
group. Yes, yes. And at that time, then our population was going up a little more. We had about 4,500. And so we have this paper here that you've had in your archives, your personal archives,
Yes.
which is the Junior Order of United American Mechanics, a boost for Miamisburg. So they were very enthusiastic about that, Bobby?
It was a Jubilee celebration, I think, for the Junior OUAM, and they turned it into a raw Miamisburg celebration. It lasted a week, and everybody got involved. If you noticed in there, all of the business people, the schools, the churches, everybody was involved in this big Jubilee. It was like our sesquicentennial, and it lasted for a week, and they had all kinds. They brought in plays and music and everything for people to go to, and of course the food was all over the place. Everybody was selling food for everything, and it was quite a celebration.
Well, they were well thought of, and they were a very benevolent group. Mm-hmm. They got away from that union aspect of it, and they had a special insurance program that took care of the spouse or anybody in that family that belonged there, took care of the funeral expenses, and then if they needed some help with groceries or something. Anything. But the one thing that they had was they had to give so much money to the Tiffin Orphanage in Tiffin, Ohio. And this was fabulous in the early 30s when there were a lot of orphan children. Mm-hmm. And they had at one time over 1,200 children in that orphanage, and they learned every trade there was, and they stayed until they graduated out of there and was assured that they would have a job because they were so well trained. One
of the things I think about was this building survived the 1913 flood, and they were in the flood area.
That's right.
Where there was 10 and 11 feet of water. So that building must have suffered greatly, and yet 9 years later, the Junior Hall bought it for what, $33,000?
Oh, well, I don't even know if it was that much, because when it was sold for rehab, it was $33,000. So I think they must have gotten it for cheaper than that way back then.
Way back then.
Yes.
Well, they whatever Junior Hall spent, I'm sure that they spent a lot of money rehabbing it, because they could not have done in that 9 years for the amount of usage that it was getting. They would not have had the money to put back into rehabbing it the way the juniors did.
Yes.
And they made a beautiful building out of it.
Yes, yes. One of the things, though, that upset some of the people was the presence of a saloon.
Yes.
That was the WCTU.
Yes, the WCTU, Women's Christian Temperance Union, and they were very strong in Miamisburg. They were determined to get rid of some of the bars downtown, and there were plenty of them. But they decided they were going to object. They had the graduation services there because it would seat 800 people. And they thought that was not right, that this saloon should abut this building that was having the graduation. It was not a good influence on the children, and they should not be doing that in the, Miles Blossom, who was the editor of the newspaper at that time, he was the funniest man anyway, and he wrote flowery writings in his newspaper. So he put in the bulletin this, he could not understand why they were objecting. He couldn't see how the fumes of the alcohol from this could get through all that brick building and into to upset our graduate students. So it made a funny little story.
Oh, well, they must have been successful getting rid of the bars, because I understand there were quite a few in the area.
There were, yes.
But you know that group started in Hillsboro, Ohio?
I didn't know that.
Yes, in 1873.
Oh my God.
And then it grew into a national organization.
It was interesting in this paper that every company in Miamisburg or business who put their ad in there, if any of their members were members of the junior, they would put it on the bottom of the ad.
Yes, I noticed that.
Yes, so we're part of you.
Yes, yes, that was excellent. But now the way that it is used is receptions is still, I mean, it's revived because after all the activities were done, then it was dormant for a long time and suffered the rain and a lot of decay that way because nothing was going in there.
Yeah.
And there was no way to maintain it. And I guess they had some pigeons running through
Oh,
there
yes,
too.
yes.
It was not in good shape.
It was not a healthy building or in any sense of the word.
Right. Well, then that's when it was sold for at a sheriff's sale in 1994.
94.
And then that was where they purchased
They
it.
paid $33,000
Right.
for it.
Yes. So then the association bought that, and they rehabbed it.
Yes, the Baum Opera Association rehabbed it, and they called in people. They did a big splash in the newspaper. Can you help with this? And people came in, organizations like the Rotary Club or the Lions Club. They would volunteer so many hours, and they would go in and work and getting all the trash out of it, and there was a multitude of that. Plus cleaning up and tearing out things, and I remember George Donahue saying that he had spent the whole day pulling, remember the old square nails?
Oh,
well, some
yeah.
of the
Oh,
stuff that
yes.
they pulled out of it, the wood was so rotten they couldn't use it. And he sat there and diligently pulled out all the square nails and saved them in case they wanted to use them for something. But they did a marvelous job. And then the city was able to get government funds. And they supervised the use of the government funds since it was to the city for the purpose of the Baumhaus. And they are the ones who redid the roof, the beautiful slate roof, and did some of the large things that needed to be done. And now we have, did we mention that there also is a small museum within a museum?
No,
Because when you go
that's
in the
right.
front door and go around to the elevator, and they do have an elevator, they have a small fireman's museum, and I think they have an old pumper engine. I guess they called them an engine. They were horse-drawn, whatever. And then some memorabilia from the fire department that goes way back. And then there is a Kaufman buggy that's on display there that I think belongs to Carol Zink. But some nice...
And a special
nice
room in
there. And on the main floor, they have a mural, and that's been painted in the last few years by Eric. Yes, Eric Henn, the famous muralist.
And then on that main floor as well, they were able to keep some of the original flooring.
Yes.
Not all of it, but
Yes.
some of it,
Yes.
yes. And then what about that other room there, the Templar room?
Oh, the Bob Templar room in the lower floor. Bob Templar, Robert Templar, was a Miamisburg grad who went out into the world and made a success of his life. And he had a lot of memorabilia that he wanted saved, and he wanted a place to put it. So they offered him some space on their lower floor, and he paid to have all of his room, the Bob Templar room, built on that second floor, and it has all of his memorabilia, and you can go in and they will guide you to look through his stuff if you're looking for something. And then he very wisely set up an endowment fund for maintaining his little museum within a museum.
And it's worth a visit to go in and see that, and you wonder, gee, this man really was active and did a lot. But didn't he play football for?
I think he played football. He it came back every year. He lived in Maryland toward the end of his life, but he did move into Miamisburg. And he would come in once a year and give a banquet for, I think it was the football team.
Okay.
And they looked forward to that.
Oh,
he
I'm
was
sure.
very generous.
Yes.
Good man.
Yes. Well, now, though, they do have a young woman there, that Jamie. Bridewell, and she has a wonderful sense of the history of the building.
She loves it.
Oh, yes, yes. But now it's open for receptions and dances, weddings, reunions. And the Children's Theater, I think, is marvelous that they have this opportunity for the children to come out. As you can see here, This was The Wizard of Oz. And look at the number of children and young adults that were involved with the program. And that's only one of the shows they've had. They've had Annie, they've had The Music Man, they had Broadway. And I just think that's great that they have that opportunity because, you know, the schools don't have time to put on something like this. But the children have taken to that as well as their parents bringing them to that. So. Well, that pretty well takes us through the BOM, which is one of the most interesting buildings that we have. A couple other things, though. We've had some interesting people stop there to give a presentation, and one of them was William Jennings Bryan.
Oh, my.
And he was stumping, as they say, for the presidency. He didn't win because he was campaigning against McKinley, and he won the election that year. But one of the things that he did start was that going around as a candidate. He really was the first one to do that and campaign for his position or to his job to be elected. But I think some people will remember the name William Jennings Bryan as someone involved with the Scopes trial and evolution. And he was certainly against that. And another person who came through was this Vivian Gray. He was a war correspondent from London, and he didn't have any money. He was just going to go start in Boston and go all the way through to Mexico, but he stopped here in Miamisburg. And he arrived here May 14th, 1894, and one of the gifts that we gave him was one of our folding boats.
Folding boats,
sent him on his way.
And I am sure that Mr. Allen and Mr. Gamble were there, who owned the boat company, watching him and waving to him as he went down the river. Miamisburg's had some fun times, and you kind of wonder if after McKinley beat him and was promptly assassinated, if he didn't sort of feel glad he wasn't elected.
Right. Oh, well, that's great. We could go on about the BOM because it's such a great place. So now we'll go back to Main Street.
All right.
And we will visit our second building, which is at 1618 South Main, and it's the Liesenhof block, built in 1884, the same year as the BOM.
Yes.
How about that? And by Frank Liesenhof, who was a native of Prussia and arrived in Miamisburg in 1864 and opened up his tailoring shop.
He did that. He was born in Westphalia, Prussia, and was an older man when he came in because he was apprenticed while he was in Germany, because Prussia and Germany, you know, were side by side. And he went into Germany to a strange town named Hort, H-O-E-R-D-T, Hort, Germany. And he was apprenticed and had his own shop there, and some of his children were born there. He was married there. And so when he came over, he had his son Edward was 7. So he came to the United States with children and was in Maine for a couple of years, and then he came to Miamisburg. And I don't know, I've not been able to find where he had his tailoring shop in Miamisburg, but he had it for 20 years before he built the Liesenhof building. So it must have been downtown and could possibly have been in one of the buildings that we're talking about now, and we just don't have the record that shows that that's where he was. But he was a very gifted man and did well when he built the Liesenhof block, as we call it, in 1884. He was he was operating by himself. That's what the papers have said. He was written up, I don't know if you're familiar with the Centennial portrait of biographical records of the city of Dayton and Montgomery County. And it has all of these, it's a list of all the people of prominence, and he and his son were both in that. So they obviously were prominent people. He also built a house in 1885 on Linden Avenue, a beautiful 8-room home that is still standing and still. What I love about the house that, or the building that he built, is that it has the two buildings on the first floor are sort of ordinary. You know, they're not. But then you get beyond that, and you see those wonderful round porthole style windows. I think that's the beauty of that whole building. And then it goes up, and it has pilasters and decorations, and of course the pediment on the top with his name on it, as it would have. But it's a beautiful building, and a tribute to our downtown. I think it's my favorite of the buildings downtown.
It is. And
you know, he made ready-made clothes
yes.
for men. That he was a haberdasher.
Yes.
Because he had the shirts and the underwear and the hats and the ties, the cravats, and yet these tailors sometimes made clothes for women, suits, especially the suits and the long coats in the wintertime.
Yes.
The heavier ones, they would do some for women.
Yes. Our generation, though, will remember this building as the home of the Westcott Five and Dime, or Joffe's dress shop. And earlier, Stout Will Britton and his drugstore.
And his drugstore. In fact, that's in this, his ad is in that paper.
And it's now that the you see two parts of it. The part that would be the south end is Christmas on Main Street. Of course,
yes.
that's only open like
Christmas
Thanksgiving
time.
through January 2nd when
yes.
he has his
but
final
they
sale.
have beautiful things in there at
They
Christmas
do.
time.
And at one time, you could buy the tape of Ruth Lyons and her music. Remember that?
Yes.
Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
Those were the days, too. And now, though, on the north side of that, the other half of that building, Melanie Wild is putting in her Curious Styles and Coffee Shop. And she will have Wi-Fi, so you can go in there and do all you need to do, the technical stuff.
I think they're planning their grand opening one of these days.
I think it's March 12th so far.
Is it?
Yes,
Okay.
yes. So that takes us through. That is, as you say, those porthole windows are just great. So now let's take in the last building that we're going to be talking about, and that is the A.R. Stocker building, which is at 48 South Main Street.
And this is a Victorian two-story building with a heavily decorated parapet up at the top.
Well, that's the old building, isn't it?
Oh, that's the old building.
That's
Okay.
That's the way it was. We like the newer
Well,
one. It looks
there
better.
we like the new look so much better, because the older picture was, we're talking about the 40s and 50s, not the beautiful building that had been first built there. Yes, it's gorgeous, and that's 20 karat? What?
24 karat
24
gold.
karat gold
Yes.
in some of that you can see, especially in those fans up in the parapet up there. And look at the pediments over the windows, how beautiful those are. And they're all carved and engraved on the insides, which I think are absolutely gorgeous. And the colors that he's used has brought back the beauty of that building. So we're so lucky to have that. Mr. Stocker was well known in Miamisburg. They called him Major because he was so involved in the IOOF, and we can't get into that because that's lengthy. Yes.
But you talk about the artistry of Stocker, and we have a picture of one of the church that he had done some side altars
The side
to
altars,
that.
beautiful
There.
things.
See,
yes.
those two side altars. I guess they're wood, though, aren't they?
They are
Carved
wood. They were painted white, but they were wood, but they were exquisitely done.
Well, thank you, Bobby. This was great. I think we could still go on because I had some things I wanted to say about the Stocker building, but we'll do that at another time.
All right.
But thank you, and we have completed the second part of the three-part series of the building of our historic district. And the third set and the final part of the series will include the McGuire House, which is on the other side of Linden Avenue, the Weaver Building, and the IOOF block. And I'm sure people are always wondering, what does that stand for? So thank you to our viewers for tuning in to Historic Miamisburg, the Bicentennial Edition.